Great, so continuing with the program today, I want to introduce the first speaker of the day. We have with us Lady Sarakita Ofringa. She's a knight in the Order of Oranje-Nassau from the Kingdom of the Netherlands. She also holds a degree in Science and Innovation Management from the University of Utrecht, but most of you that know her may know her from her windsurfing career. She's a professional windsurfer. She has been competing for over 11 years now and has accumulated over 12 world titles. Sarakita, please. The mic's not working.
Hello? We're on. Yeah? Okay, show you. Recently, I was in a gym all sweaty when this man walked up to me and asked, "Is windsurfing all you do?" Normally, I counter this question and say, "Well, no, I'm a student actually." But who am I kidding, really? It's been 2.5 years since I earned my bachelor's degree, and since then, I've been on at least 30 trips. They all involved windsurfing. So I smile and tell him that, indeed, I am a professional windsurfer. And I can't lie, it's my biggest passion. Windsurfing is such a challenging sport and gives me an adrenaline rush that keeps me coming back for more. I will let you in on a secret though. I wish that traveling with windsurfing would be lighter. On social media, I make it look like this, but behind the scenes, it's a bit more of a hassle. Nonetheless, I feel very grateful for this opportunity I have of traveling the world doing something that I love. Actually, there is no what if to my story. It took a village to raise me. My mom can tell you all about that after this talk. But I'd like to think that I was raised in several villages. Each of these villages provided me with people and situations that taught me lessons that I could take on my journey to become the professional windsurfer I am today. In my story, I'd like to illustrate how you need to work hard for your dreams, but you also need the right people around you to make these dreams happen. Metaphorically speaking, I was raised in 3 villages. Aruba, where I grew up. Later, I moved to Holland to study science and innovation management. And in between Aruba and Holland, I traveled a lot. So in that sense, the world and the people that I met were the 3rd village. Let's take a deeper look in this village, and I'll explain what each of them taught me. In Aruba, the foundation was laid for my academic and windsurfing career. My parents were the one that got me into the sport, and the environment at the Fisherman's Huts, Aruba, where I learned windsurfing, was perfect for me to excel at my sport. First and foremost, my parents brought my brother and I to the beach one day to try this new water sport. Unlike my brother, who took to windsurfing immediately, I couldn't lift my sail. I was only 9 years old. I decided to quit. However, a year later, my parents challenged me to try it again. They entered me at the Bonaire Regatta, which meant that I had 4 months to practice. I had so much fun this week in Bonaire that I fell in love with windsurfing. Now, 16 years later, windsurfing has taken me on amazing adventures. Besides my parents, the environment at the huts was perfect for me to learn windsurfing. It's windy practically all year long, and the water is shallow, so it's kid-friendly. I joined the Wind Racers Club Aruba, and with a big group of kids, we would travel around the island to different spots and practice together. It always revolved around having fun. Then there were always also the locals that were always very helpful, but would challenge me at the same time. Anytime I broke anything, I was very welcome at the center to get it fixed. That way I could get on the water as soon as possible. But if I landed a new trick and came back to the beach, they didn't allow me to bask in the glory. They would send me out immediately to try something more complex. They definitely kept me busy, but they were also the ones that always pushed me to do better. As much as my parents supported my brother and I in our windsurfing activities, school always came first. If we didn't finish our homework, we were not allowed to go to the beach. And believe me, that was a serious threat. But soon I learned that windsurfing and school was complementary to each other. After a session on the water, it would ease my mind so that later on I could get into my homework easier. And because I practiced several sports, I learned this discipline to plan my studies ahead and so that I'd be on time for practice later on. Once I finished high school, it came natural to me to want to combine my windsurfing career and my studies when I moved to Holland. Finally, growing up in Aruba, I have this open and welcoming mindset. Since we host so many tourists, I'm comfortable making small talk with unknown people, having grown up multilingual in languages. Having this open mindset and an ability to communicate later made traveling and meeting new people that much easier for me. In Aruba, the foundation was laid. Later, I moved to Holland to study science and innovation management. As you can imagine, moving from a laid-back Caribbean island to a busy European country was a huge culture shock. And that wasn't just because my laundry wasn't being done for me anymore. In Holland, I had to become more independent. I learned to organize myself. I started to be grateful for the little things. And I figured out what my passion really was. Like any first-time students, there were the basic things that I learned in Holland, like cooking, cleaning, speaking up for myself, and planning ahead for bad weather. But the one thing that I really started to value in Holland was time. Because unlike in Aruba, in Holland, time is limited. Because you travel so much, so long, there's only so much you can do in a day. Very soon I learned that being on time and using my time effectively was very important. In Holland, windsurfing was not as accessible to me as it was in Aruba. I didn't have transportation to go to the beach, neither did I have a place to store my gear. And since I have so much stuff, I don't like to bother people with it. But in my time there, I've learned that a helping hand is always available. I just had to ask. Soon I met a lady that allowed me to store my gear in her shed. There were Dutch sailors that didn't mind picking me up at the station and take me to the ocean. I had friends that received my whole new shipment of gear at their house when I wasn't even in the country. And every time I had to travel out, I would rent a car, pick up my gear at this lady's house, and drop my stuff at the airport the day before I had to travel. Fortunately, I always had someone willing to help me drag my bags through the airport. Being able to depend on these people on my basic needs for windsurfing, I was able to focus on the things that were actually important, like planning my trips, for example. Which brings me to the part where I started traveling out of necessity and fell in love with it. In Aruba, I never had the need to escape winter for obvious reasons. But I found myself in Holland one day, sailing in 5 degrees, not able to feel my hands anymore. I quickly grasped this concept and soon figured out exactly when I had time off between my semesters and studied as hard as I could so I wouldn't have to retake my exams during that time. That way I could fly out to the windiest and warmest places and train. I went to places like Cape Town, Brazil, Egypt, and Canary Islands. It was the first time I traveled out to a place of choice and not just for competition. And that's when I realized that that's what I wanted to do. Windsurfing and traveling became my drive to study as hard as I could so I could travel out as soon as possible. Having said that, that meant I had to get organized. I had to book my tickets, plan when I would take my gear to the airport, and find accommodation. Of course, I made the necessary mistakes. I've flown out without finding accommodation, thinking that would magically be arranged like when I used to travel with my parents. It didn't. And I've ended up sleeping on the floor more than a couple of times. But I think I have it under control now. Finally, in Holland, I started to appreciate things more. For example, when the sun would come out after it's been hiding for weeks. I even started to appreciate the gray days because at least it wasn't raining. All in all, Holland was an invaluable experience for me. Moving on to the third village, I started competing at a very young age. This has brought in broadened my mind to different ways of thinking and showed me the beauty of this world. I've learned that capabilities matter most, that I can never put myself ahead of anybody. If I wanted to progress, I needed to challenge myself and to always think in solutions. When I was 11 years old, I saw professional windsurfers for the first time in Bonaire. I remember watching them perform and thinking to myself, this is what I want to do too. And a year later, the professional tour returned to Bonaire, and they allowed me to compete with the big girls, even though they thought I was too young. I didn't know my age was being discussed, and as far as I knew, my gear was supposed to feel that heavy. I finished 5th at this event. Later on, I met my first sponsors, and I started competing internationally. At 15, I won my first World Cup event, and at 17, I won the freestyle world title. Looking back now, I wonder what my parents were thinking, letting me compete against women twice my age. Because of course, at 14, 15, I thought I was pretty grown up. I only saw what these ladies, I didn't pay attention to our age differences. I only saw what these ladies were able to do on the water, and that's how I measured myself against them. I think capabilities is all that matters. Having won the freestyle title, I looked for another challenge. Competing on this professional tour, I'm surrounded by people that are the best in the world at their craft. Can you imagine the accumulated knowledge I had to my access? I could learn so much just by asking questions and watching. I naturally progressed into slalom sailing because you perform this on flat water. At first, I made a lot of mistakes and I was very inconsistent in my races, but the riders were always willing to give me advice. With this advice and putting in the effort, I figured out that I had a knack for this discipline as well. And now I have 3 world titles under my belt. Further challenging myself, 3 years ago, I decided to move into wave sailing. This progression is not going as naturally as I hoped it would. Fear plays a bigger role in this discipline. Because you jump that much higher, the crashes are that much harder. And having grown up on a flat water island, anything bigger than knee-high would frighten me.